disruption is something which I actually think is quite needed.
Would you potentially move to the other side and vote for a Democrat?
I want to say I am fed up with a lot of the mainstream pro-life movement.
Can an individual be a mature Christian follower of Christ and still vote for the Democratic Party?
This is not a new question.
What's up, guys? This is Ryan. I am here with my best friend, Nick, and we are not coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York like usual. We made a little bit of a trip down to Kentucky, and we are on the beautiful campus of SBTS here in order to have a conversation with one of our theological heroes, Dr. Albert Mohler. So, Dr. Mohler, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an honor to be with you guys. Thank you.
So let's go ahead and jump right on in. I don't think that you need much of an introduction. Most people know who you are, who watch our channel at least. So recently we got the election results. Yeah. And Republicans took the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Yeah. And so we wanted to jump right in and see what are some of your hopes? What do you think are some positive outcomes of the Republicans sort of doing that sweep?
Well, I think just in the economy of politics, you're not going to have gridlock now because you're going to have consolidated power in one party. That is usually a fragile thing in American politics. You look at a long period of time, such as Republicans right after the Civil War or Democrats in the middle of the 20th century. And so you do have some periods of uninterrupted one-party rule. But by and large, it's a back and forth in American politics. And so when you do have this alignment, it's a rare opportunity. So I would say the Republicans have a perishable but very powerful opportunity here. Yeah. And we're about to find out where Republicans are. So when you're in a majority or in your control in all these arenas of politics, the differences among you really turn out to be absolutely crucial. Yeah. And that's what we don't know right now. Right. So, even as we're thinking about this question, with the Republicans moving into a Senate majority, the question of majority leader turns out to be a really big question. And that's a secret vote, by the way. So in other words, we'll know the result. And, the Trump people are leaning in one way, kind of old style Republicans leaning in another way, 3 candidates. So all I'm saying is this doesn't necessarily get less interesting, but it does mean that one party now bears the stewardship of all the initiative. And in American politics, that's no small thing. It's a fairly rare opportunity. Yeah. Yeah, agreed. And we'll see. I guess we'll see how long it lasts here. Hopefully, well, it's going to last 2 years. At least 2 years. At least 2 years. At least 2. We know that for sure. That's exactly the right point. America, in terms of our separation of powers, has some pretty quickly correctable situations if the American people decide to correct.
So with that being said, what are some sort of legislation changes, or what sort of things do you think are going to benefit our country because of this shift?
Well, I think if you look in a global context, America's role in the world is going to be renegotiated. I think there's just no question that a President Trump has a very different understanding of America's role in the world than President Biden. President Biden, by the way, in this case, would represent a sort of bipartisan consensus for, say, the last 60 or 70 years. But that bipartisan consensus is breaking down in both parties. And so in this sense, you really do see Joe Biden as, I think, the kind of last of a type. And that was more or less the American internationalist. And I think what now is going to happen on both sides, I think, of the partisan line is I think there's going to be a renegotiation of what it means for America to have a foreign policy in the world that means global leadership, but not American troops on the ground everywhere in the world where there's a problem. Yeah. It's just one thing. I think domestically, wow, this is going to be really interesting because with President Trump, you're going to have an awful lot of promises made about absolute disruption. But, disruption is something which I actually think is quite needed. But you've got to have something better on the other side than what you disrupted. Yeah. And so, put bluntly, that's the challenge of the Republican Party and the Trump administration. disrupting is one thing, and frankly, I think it's a necessary thing. But what's put together on the other side has to be seen by the American people as better than the state before.
Yeah. I think that I agree there. And I think that there's also sort of this changing of the face of conservatism or republicanism, maybe more particularly, because when I think of just the past few weeks, some of the faces of the movement are Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Vivek, Trump himself. And it feels like there's sort of this shift in personality or identity of the Republican Party from more of, in the past, we saw it being the Christian moral type that's the face of the party. And now it's moving to more of a Vivek's Hindu, Joe Rogan and Elon Musk are atheists. Donald Trump is Christian, perhaps. And so I wonder what your thoughts are, if this shift is actually happening, if it's a good or a bad thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've never put it this way before, but I will tell you, at least I think for the foreseeable future, the picture of the, say, average Republican man is shifting from a banker in a gray suit to a young guy with a beard and tats.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in some ways, it can be a shift to the good. It could also be a shift towards, quite frankly, an ambiguity about where some of these guys would even want the country to go. So, in other words, they represent something very new. And by the way, I think something healthy, but it has to be directed in a healthy direction. But, I do think it's the failure of the guys in the gray suits.
Yeah.
I say, standing here, part of a generation that I'm indicting wearing a suit. That's who I am. That's how I show up.
Yeah.
But I want to tell you, on this campus, in the church, and in the country, I think the future is in these young men showing up who look a bit different and dress a bit differently. Not that I'm talking about two people at the table here.
Yeah, you can't really trust those bearded guys with tattoos, can you? You can't trust them too much.
My beard's not long enough.
I'm just telling you that there's something healthy about men showing up where the decisions are big and the issues are hot.
Yeah.
And that has to be a good thing. Doesn't mean it's always channeled in the right direction, but man, that is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. For us, we want to stay ourselves. And I was somewhat tempted to wear a suit just because I wanted to look as good as you.
Yeah.
But we want to always be ourselves. I mean, there is a place to wear a suit. Oh, of course. But earlier you said that Joe Biden
I was in a situation just over the weekend, where I was the only person dressed like this. And I just said what I've been saying for years this is just what I do.
Yeah.
The second thing is you reach a certain point in life as a man when more clothes is better.
There you go. And I'm sure at some point we'll be there too.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Just being honest.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, you do look good today. You look sharp.
Yeah.
Earlier you said that there was a type of Democrat, like Joe Biden is now long and gone with that type of Democrat. But when we think of a type of conservative, right, most of the conservatives in my life are strong against abortion.
Right.
And one of the things that they have against Trump is that he has a softer view against abortion due to electability issues. So,
or maybe due to the fact he's Donald Trump.
Yeah. So what is your take on that? We recently had a debate on abolitionism or pro-life. Where's your take on that? And how do you view Trump's take on abortion?
Well, you kind of threw two big issues out there. So let me take the Trump part first.
Sure.
I'm very disappointed in President Trump's transition on this issue. But as my face will show, I am not shocked. I think in this sense, I think President Trump, he tends to say out loud what other politicians just wouldn't say. They would think this, they wouldn't say it. Donald Trump will say it. That's it. That's what he does. And so he said, well, I have to get elected or none of this is going to matter.
Yeah.
So he actually put it in those words. Okay, I get that. And I've been in the pro-life movement and quite frankly, active in this political arena for a very long time. And so I can remember when the pro-life movement had no political power and it gained some political power, I think for good. But I think it just underlines the scale of the challenge that Christians face in contending for the sanctity and dignity of all human life but in particular where it is most threatened right now in the womb. And so I don't underestimate that challenge. So in answering the first part of your question, I think the political calculus always has to be, just in terms of the Christian understanding, how we can do most good and least evil. And so that was not a hard decision for me in this case. It was not easy, on the other hand, because that doesn't mean I'm satisfied. And so one of the things we have to say, I think, especially younger evangelicals, as you think about voting, you could find a candidate who would be absolutely satisfying to you, or at least far more satisfying to you than someone else. But at the end of the day, one of those two people at the top of the ticket with the D and an R, they're going to be elected. One of those is going to be elected president of the United States. And that means, in our context now, forming a government. And as we're having this conversation, that's what Donald Trump is doing. He is forming a government. I think there'll be a lot of people in that government who believe what I believe they ought to believe on the sanctity of human life.
Yeah.
I believe the alternative government put into place would be aggressively on the other side. So I don't want to underestimate the compromise that, we find ourselves in. I also don't want to underestimate the threat we had to defend against. I hope that makes sense. And so this is where I want to move to the most restrictive abortion policy imaginable.
Gotcha.
It's going to take political work to get there. That's just the way this works.
So it sounds to me like you might be leaning more incremental over immediatist when it comes to your policies.
I don't understand this debate. I just don't. Tell me how this works.
So we actually hosted a debate on this topic about a month or two ago.
Yeah.
And there's an immediatist abolitionist position that says it matters not how many babies we save necessarily. They argue that what matters is that a incremental pro-life law is unjust because it introduces unequal weights and measures. And so they say that God hates unequal measures and weights, and because of that, God hates the incremental pro-life law. That is the argument of
so
the
what would the Lord prefer in that?
And they would also say that every crime deserves just punishment. And if we are going to be sending murderers to jail, we should be also criminalizing abortion.
I have publicly stated my agreement with that principle.
Yeah.
I publicly stated my agreement with that principle in front of thousands of people at the SBC, consistently on my podcasts and in other arenas.
Yeah.
Now, that is also within the same scheme, is that when you're talking about weights and measures and justice, when it comes to just say the laws concerning murder, homicide, there are an array of charges. There are a multiplicity, to say the very least, of circumstances. But the law begins with the fact that if there is a dead human being that is dead by someone's hand, then some moral and legal accounting must be made. That is the principle with which I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was a political deal made by the pro-life movement when it was the doctors' crusade against abortion in the 19th century to present women solely as innocent victims manipulated by men in abortion. Now, the sad thing is that that's not always untrue. That is sometimes very true. Someone's boyfriend drives them and forces them to get an abortion, or a father, someone, there's social pressure. But when you've got women marching out there saying they're going to shout their abortion, well, guess what? They're demonstrating their moral agency. I'll take her at her word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that part. But going back to the other part, the incrementalism. All law is incremental in any human society. And so I don't think it's an intellectual problem. But I don't mean that condescendingly. But I don't understand what they mean. And even when I hear some of these people make these arguments and state it in the formula you just said, they will come around and say they just voted for Donald Trump. So tell me which one of these principles you operate by.
Yeah.
And so I don't understand the non-incrementalist position, because the entire law is set up incrementally. Homicide is treated incrementally. That's one of the points. So in other words, premeditated murder is treated incrementally.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to say, well, we usually don't come out with our positions, but I would have to agree with you on that point. I stand with you on.
Well, and I appreciate so much what some of my abolitionist brothers are trying to work for.
Yeah.
In other words, they're tired with political compromises. I'm also tired of the compromises. However, you say politics, you're talking about compromise. That's the one thing I want to say. So if you elect these abolitionists to the legislature, they're going to end up making compromises.
Yeah.
I may try to call them something else, but that's what it is.
Yep.
And that's, I mean, the only way around that is to have a strong man who says, I won't compromise. I alone establish, the law. So I want to say I am fed up with a lot of the mainstream pro-life movement. And I think I've demonstrated I won't play the game, especially as, even when it comes down to moral agency and holding those who seek abortions properly accountable. I also, as I said, I want to move towards the greatest protection of the greatest number of the unborn we can possibly achieve. But, even if the abolitionists got to establish their policy, I'm not sure how they're going to get it through a single state legislature at this point.
Yeah.
I want to say that as friendly as I can.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest gripes that my abolitionist friends have is that they're in the courts fighting for abolitionist bills that I think all of us at the table would vote yes for. And there's people in the pro-life movement that are actively fighting against it because they just want pro-life. They want more restrictive, but they don't want complete abolition because they don't believe in the criminalization of it. And I think they're constantly, I have friends that say that they fight more so with pro-lifers than they do with people that are pro-choice.
In the legislatures.
In the legislators.
Yeah. Well, look, I can't dissect every one of those confrontations. They all have to be put in the context of what is legislatively possible at a moment. And that's Augustinian Christian theology. That's just how you keep your integrity as a Christian and serve as a soldier in Caesar's army without bending the knee to Caesar. It's a hard thing to pull off, but somehow, by God's grace, we've got to work towards that.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Florida, I think, which is right now a Republican stronghold, almost passed.
A majority I should say, a plurality of voters, and can't say a majority of citizens, but a majority of those voting voted for an extremely liberal position on abortion that would have made, it would have amended the Constitution. So we should be thankful for that 60 vote threshold. That's a wake up call for us.
Yeah.
I consider the abolitionists, I take them at their word, although I don't think they often operate by what they say is that principle when it comes down to actual politics.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't say I'm an abolitionist and I voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah. And I have a lot of friends, actually, the guy that just debated on our channel, T. Russell Hunter. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he refused to vote for Trump.
Yeah, well, there are some people,
and I can respect that consistency. Honestly, I can respect the people who draw the line, but I could also respect your position as well.
Well, I am trying to put as much pressure as I can on the polis, the political structure. I'll just say, in order to give as many people as much pro-life conviction where it's going to matter.
Yeah,
and I will also say when I heard what you said. I want to take that with full moral seriousness. And so I want to ask you to repeat the part you said in the beginning, because you said it more succinctly than I've heard anyone else say it, about not prioritizing saving unborn babies now.
Right. Yeah. So the abolitionists would say that's not necessarily their goal. Their goal is to write just laws. And so since a pro-life incremental law would save perhaps 70% of the babies and not 30%, they would say that that's an unjust law with unequal weights and measures.
The unequal weights and measures thing, again, I admire that. And that's very much addressed to Israel. But I'd like to know in one post-Israel government where there was not some unequal weights and measures, and our job is to make them more equal.
That's a great point.
I don't have a clue what they're talking about through millennia of history.
Yeah.
So I understand the principle, but I also say, and frankly, I appreciate the challenge to the existing pro-life consensus, which I think is too weak. Okay, so I want to state that, but I also want to say they would not follow that principle if they had an opportunity to save, I believe, one unborn life today. By their intervention, I believe they would seek to do that.
Yeah.
I don't believe they would. I believe they would seek to do that.
Yeah. So you mean in a scenario where they were at, a Planned Parenthood, you're saying they would intervene for that one and miss another?
I think if someone came to them for counsel, if they had a distant relative in which they might be able to speak into the situation, any number of situations, or if they had a situation where they could establish a policy that right now would save that baby, they would do so.
Yeah, when it meets the pavement, they would.
I believe they would, and so I hope I'll just stop there. So it's a good conversation.
It is.
Sure.
It is.
Yeah.
And in the same vein, sort of, piggybacking off of the Florida thing that we brought up and perhaps the new face of the Republicans, it seems within the Republican Party, being pro-life is declining in popularity. So I wonder, do you think with this shift in the base, do you think it's possible that they'll abandon the pro-life position at some point?
I think there's a lot of energy towards that.
Yeah.
And I want to tell you, I think it's two things. Number one, it's age.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm 65. I entered the pro-life conversation at 13. Roe v. Wade just happened. My mother was an early pro-life activist.
Okay.
Honestly, it was a very traumatic thing for me. I came up from school one day and found her file of pictures on the table.
Yeah.
13-year-old boy. I had no equipment for this. It was very traumatic. And I think that shows the morality of this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, a 13-year-old child can look at these pictures and know something's horribly wrong here. Dismembered baby.
Yeah.
And, but I think we have young people, and by the way, young people appeared to be more pro-life than their parents through the 80s, 90s, and maybe early into the 21st century. And some people were saying that is, if nothing more, it's the common grace of a sonogram, of an image. Because, you can't simultaneously put the picture up on the refrigerator and say that's little brother, or that's little sister, and then say that's not a human being.
It's a clump of cells. Yeah.
It's common grace, and it had an enormous effect. And the Republican Party and the entire conservative movement in the United States kind of capitalized on that. I'm not saying there were no principled people. I think there were people with deep principle in that.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that becomes evident to us is not demographics, it's morality.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that when it was easy to articulate a pro-life position, a lot of people did.
Mm-hmm.
And by easy, I meant Roe gave them cover. Roe v. Wade gave them cover. Okay. So once Roe v. Wade was reversed by the Supreme Court, their cover disappeared. And guess what? They're equivocating. Some cases, they're just absolutely retreating. So I am surprised and not surprised by what's happened post-Dobbs. I think it just underlines the fact that building a culture of life is a far greater challenge in a post-Christian society than a lot of pro-lifers would like to think. And let me say this. I speak at a lot of pro-life events. I only speak at ones where I believe they're genuinely pro-life. In other words, I want to know exactly what they represent. I want to know exactly what their argument is. I want to know exactly what this ministry is. I want to know how this stops abortions from happening. I want to know how this saves lives. Because there's an awful lot out there in the pro-life movement that's more about movement than pro-life. Okay. Said it out loud, but there it is.
Yeah. I think we're in agreement there. A lot of these movements are not helpful. They're more so a front to bring in money or to make a political point or whatever. I guess my follow-up question is if the Republican Party completely goes the other way and starts supporting abortion, I know that's a lot of people's bread and butter, why they vote conservative.
Right.
Would you potentially move to the other side and vote for a Democrat if the Republicans lower their standards with abortion fully?
That's a very strange threat to make. And I just think it reflects a lot of really shallow and superficial thinking. So let me just state that if that were to happen, both parties were to align against us, say, on abortion, we'd be living in Britain.
Yeah.
Where the two major parties are already there. And you can say, well, we can start a third party and all the rest. Well, that's a parliamentary system of government. Third parties here end up with zero.
Right.
That's just I think that's a fixture in the American political system. It's a strength when it's a strength. It's a weakness when it's a weakness. Okay. So, the other thing is that a Christian, I want to say, even to, or maybe especially to pro-life Christians, we shouldn't suffer under the illusion that this can be separated from a host of other issues.
Yeah.
One of them is an understanding of the power of government, the rule and responsibility of government. We can't separate. I mean, why is it that by and large, if you look at someone's position on abortion, you can fairly well predict their position on the definition of marriage.
Yeah.
If they've accommodated themselves on abortion, it's rare they haven't accommodated themselves elsewhere. And it's because we understand that Christian truth hangs together. It's a comprehensive whole. And so I would say Christians are going to have to grow up and understand we've got to achieve as much for that concentrated whole as we can. But we're in a fallen world. And, you know, if you want to play utopian politics, you better start writing fantasy literature. Because that doesn't exist on planet Earth. And our theology actually explains why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Catholics, Sir Thomas More can write about utopia. Martin Luther can't.
Yeah,
unless
right.
it's the kingdom of Christ.
Right.
So yeah, just to make things stir the pot a little bit. I know we
haven't been stirring the pot.
Yeah, no.
All right.
I'm here to learn from you. I'm here. I admire you tremendously. This is a complete honor for me. And if you disagree with something that I said, I want to know why. Yeah. We opened up the show with a prayer, and you said that you disagreed with the premise. Let's hear it. Why is that? I'm willing to be corrected on camera. I don't care. What did I say that was wrong?
Well, you know, I meant that in a positive engagement way, or I wouldn't have said it.
Oh, of course.
So I'm also very glad to have this conversation with you. You said something like secular conservatism.
Christless conservatism.
Christless conservatism. Finish the sentence.
In the prayer, I said Christless conservatism is pointless. I should have rephrased it.
Yeah, I don't believe Christless conservatism is pointless. In this sense, we're in the earthly city. In the earthly city, we find ourselves with some strange alliances.
Yes.
And so even secular or Christless conservatives are seeking to conserve something. I want more than that, but I don't want less than that.
There is, you're bringing to mind like Xerxes and Cyrus and other evil kings of the Bible who also did good things for Israel in the Old Testament. So that there's definitely something to that.
Yeah.
Well, let's put it this way. If that's a pro-life vote, I want that vote.
Yeah.
And I want that vote to be grounded in biblical truth. But you know what? I'll take the accidentally grounded on in the political process until I can get there. So I also want to tell you that I've grown up with this. So maybe this is just my autobiography. But the people who influenced my understanding of conservatism in when I was a teenager were pretty explicitly secular. Okay. So I wasn't satisfied with that. And I was already a believing Christian. And so I was eager to find out how in a Christian frame these things could be rightly understood.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that Christian frame has borrowed an awful lot of its categories from secular conservatism. Or at least a conservatism that wasn't explicitly based, and this gets to other issues we could discuss. It's not, I think that conservatism is actually based in natural law, in common grace, in creation order, whether the people who advocate for those positions understand that or not.
What I should have said, in my opinion, is that Christless conservatism is incomplete. And it's not fully satisfying.
I fully agree with that. And I think it's fragile.
Yeah.
I think it's fragile. But I think if you look at Augustine, you look at Luther, you look at the American founding, it took the complicity of Christian constitutionalists and more secular, and I use that in an 18th century frame. So let's just say a less explicitly Christian in terms of personal experience conservatism to bring about the American order. I believe that was nonetheless providential. I'm thankful for it.
Yeah. So let's say this waning support of the pro-life movement continues in the Republican Party. What do you think would be a solution for Christians to chase? Should they be putting themselves into government and trying to influence it that way? What do you think?
Yeah, I was put on the spot about this just in recent days with the election being so hot on us. And I said, look, I I looked as a teenager at the possibility of the fact that God may be calling me into that calling. And I decided by my own impression and sense that was not what God was calling me to do. Rather, it was primarily as a minister of the Word of God, but very much related to these issues. And so I have to ask myself the question, given the compromises necessary in the political process, and again, someone who tells you they never compromise hasn't dealt with the ultimate compromise, which is even seeking to be in a system which is already so compromised.
Yeah.
So in other words, okay, yeah, you may be the one angel among the demons, but guess what? You just asked to be elected to join the demons. So,
Yeah, right.
So there is a sense in which some kind of compromise is happening there. So I believe Christians are called into that arena. I think it's a very problematic context.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be hypocritical. I don't want to say we need more Christians in political and in governmental office and then say, but I am too pure to enter into that compromise. I'm trying not to say that.
Yeah.
I came to determine that was not my calling, but I deal almost literally every day with those for whom that is, I believe, God's calling in their life. And by the way, I can see God's calling evident in their life in this way.
Yeah. And not only that, maybe politics wasn't your calling, but you still did end up being the president of Southern.
Seminary. And just to be clear, I mean, Bibledingers usually doesn't support any particular candidate. I mean, we're unapologetically conservative. But if you were to run for president,
you got
have our full endorsement.
I'm
Mohler for president here today. You heard it first.
I appreciate that. Several people texted me that I got some write-in votes, but
there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
But in all honesty, I just look at this electoral cycle. I could not say what I think I need to say. I could not be who I believe God's called me to be and be elected president of the United States. I can sleep okay with that. But at the same time, I think I've got to be invested in answering the question, who then should be president of the United States? I would love to be president of the United States by some kind of divine appointment, and be able to say, every teenage kid has this fantasy, just put me in charge. I'll set things right. The problem is, of course, in human history, no one ever leaves once they've been given that power. But you know what I mean? I can play around with that. But this is the situation we're handed. We're handed a situation in which politics is a very messy business.
Yeah, I do have a question. So we often talk to people who vote Democrat, and we have some friends, and we all have friends. And so I won't phrase this question as questioning their salvation. I won't do that.
Right.
But I will pose this question and say, can an individual be a mature Christian follower of Christ and still vote for the Democratic Party?
I don't believe that a faithful Christian who has faithfully thought through the issues can do that. Should do that. I'm trying to say as carefully as I can.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of like the discussion we had by looking at the more and less pro-life party. When we look at the Democratic Party these days, it's not more and less pro-abortion. It's full steam pro-abortion. And again, these are all tied together with issues. So, so I'm going to speak explicitly in political terms here. Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota has not only been an agent of bringing in, basically abortion without restriction all the way up until the moment of birth, and even with some documented cases in which that logic has been extended when you have babies who are born alive in the abortion process. But in any event, and there's just no doubt that this means, without anything other than the words on the paper, this means all the way up until the moment of birth, with absolutely no need even for, say, parents to be told that a teenager is having an abortion, because there's absolutely no age restriction whatsoever in that measure which he supported. He is also one of the ones who's basically put pressure on parents with the coercive power of the state when you have, say, a minor with a transgender question. And so, in other words, these things are not unrelated. And so I look at all that and I say, how can you be an agent of making more of that and supporting that? And you say, well, there's more to it. There's economics and all this. Yes, there is. But we all have to understand there are some issues downstream from other issues. And so the way I explain it as a theologian is this: the closer the issues get to creation order, the more clear it becomes we've got to choose A over B. And when we're talking about looking at a child and saying a boy's a girl, we're at creation order. We're at Genesis 1. Okay. So I just don't know how there's any recovery on that other side of that.
Agreed.
And, I am 65 years old. I've been at this a very long time. And, people may come at me, have fun, but I'm just simply going to say, I cannot understand any way a person can vote consistently for the party and the candidates who tell us right up front that is their goal.
We were on Smart Christian Channel, another YouTube channel, Corey Minor, and this is prior to the election. It was Nick and myself, and there were some folks who were clearly voting Democrat, and we were sort of debating these issues. And one critique they gave of us is that we have, or not necessarily us, but the conservatives in general, is that we have tunnel vision. That was their critique, and that we only focus on the abortion issue and the gender issue. And their critique is that we don't care about the person from womb to tomb, that we don't care about the child having food, we don't care about the child having shelter, we just care about the child being born. So what are your thoughts on that argument against conservatives?
I've heard that for 50, 60 years. And it sounds more stupid by the day. It sounds more intellectually and morally dishonest by the day. So here's the thing. Christians really do believe that nothing can work. To use the Catholic phrase, no human flourishing is going to result from a defiance of the most basic creation order and God's command and God's law. Now, we believe there can be flourishing pagan societies. You know what? But those societies can't be flourishing pagan societies if they don't know what a male and a female is. Those pagan societies can't be flourishing pagan societies in some imaginable South Sea island unless they honor what comes down to the institution of marriage, in which parents and especially fathers take responsibility for their offspring. And so there are an awful lot of people out there who have been throughout human history following the plan and purpose of God when they didn't even know him. But they can figure out biology. And I think by common grace, by even the moral law that God has put inside of us, in the conscience, there's a sense in which someone looks at a man and a woman, and he's got a 3-year-old on his shoulders and she's carrying an 8-month-old, and you look at that and you go, there's something right about this picture. Even where they do not know the one true and living God, they are nonetheless showing his glory in that context.
Just to throw my 2 cents in.
I did not, excuse me, just let me come back and finish that thought.
Go ahead.
Which is, so I care about the child being fed. I care about the child being clothed. I don't believe you really care about that if you destroy the creation order institution that is far more likely in every case, in every culture, in every time to provide clothes on that child and support for that child, love for that child, and food for that child. I am not denying that in the modern age, when you have mass populations, there would be some government responsibility to step in where there is brokenness in creation order. But what we have now are liberal regimes set to break creation order. And so I don't have any patience with that. So anyway, I said my piece.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. And like I said, I was going to throw my 2 cents in there and just say that it's awfully better to have a poor child than to have a dead child. And I think that it's a very American point of view to say that if you're in the lower class in America, it's justifiable to have an abortion because they're going to have this very difficult economic life. But you think about the lower class in America and then compare that to the continent of Asia, the continent of Africa. So if the lower class children of America ought to be killed because of their economic problems, what are your thoughts on the entirety of the world?
No, that's a very clear thought. Let me point to one other very clear thought. So let's say that, let's say the government is the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're going to reject creation order. We're going to reject what I think is a very biblical logic of subsidiarity. We're going to let's let government do this. Let's throw a lot of money at government.
Mm-hmm.
What do you get? A very rich government.
Yeah.
So you look at the United States, you look at Europe too, but you look at the United States over the course of, say, from the 1960s to the present, government has become big and rich.
Mm-hmm.
But we've produced even more fractured families, even more children in deep need. And look at all the headlines on the front page of America's newspapers crying out saying, we have a crisis. Boys are not doing well. Girls are not doing well. Women are more fragile than they've ever been. Men are not showing up to work. We have delayed adulthood and all the rest. So, all I'm saying is we've made government very rich and we've created a mushrooming problem. You go back to the children born outside of wedlock, outside of marriage in the 1960s and compare to now. Look at how much money we have spent. We've made the government rich. We've made the problem worse.
Yeah. I know you wanted to, we're getting close to the end here. I know you wanted to ask a couple questions about the SBC as well.
Yeah.
Shift gears a little bit.
So
SBC means what?
Southern Baptist Convention.
Thank you. Just making sure.
What else could it mean? So I know, I've been Southern Baptist practically my whole adult life. I've been going to a Southern Baptist church for a long time. I love it. I go to a Southern Baptist seminary. Hope God willing, I'll be ordained as a Southern Baptist minister.
Yeah.
So take this question with tons of respect and grace.
I'm going to correct you again.
Yeah. Correct.
You're not going to be ordained a Southern Baptist minister. There are none of those.
Okay. Well, through my church.
Ordained a minister.
Yeah.
In a Southern Baptist church.
As a Southern Baptist church.
I just want to speak a little careful point of Baptist polity.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I meant.
And SBC.
Okay. That's what I meant. So I know that we had a bunch of tons and tons of stuff on the feed on social media about the egalitarian thing.
Yeah.
And part of what we do is we try to sit down with people that have secondary doctrine issues, and we try to be gracious and navigate those things with intentionality and respect, and really not talk about people, but talk to them. How is it that we can vote against the egalitarian movement within our organization, the Southern Baptist Convention, and not take that as dividing the body of Christ?
We intend to divide the body of Christ on this issue until Christ comes and sets his body pure. In other words, we have disagreements. I mean, I don't apologize for being Baptist. Some of my closest friends are Presbyterian. We can't be in the same church because I'm not going to recognize putting water on a baby as baptism.
Yeah.
And so I'm just saying this is not a new question. I have more oil paintings in my study of Martin Luther than any other person. Okay. I'm not a Lutheran. Very thankful for Martin Luther. I'm not a Lutheran. So, in other words, we've already decided that issue long before. So, basically, denominations are the result of a theological disagreement. They're not the result of necessarily a theological rupture. So I don't anathematize Lutherans. I don't call Lutherans heretics. Now, there may be some Lutherans who are heretics, but there are also Baptists who are heretics, but it has nothing to do with being Lutheran
so
or
that's
Baptist.
that's what true division would be if we kick them out of the body.
That's a first order issue.
But we don't have to eliminate them coming to the church with us. We can say that you can't come to church with us, but that's not dividing. Dividing would be kicking them out of the body.
Well, and I just want to be honest. There's a sense of division. I mean, the Baptists came out of what was called the separatist movement.
Yeah.
In England. And we separated from somebody, and that was the Church of England because of its compromise on these theological issues. And then we separated from some of the separatists. That's where we separated from the Presbyterians. We even took most of their confession of faith. But I won't say just baptized it. We corrected it. But in other words, this just isn't new. And so where you have a denomination, a fellowship of churches, it's a fellowship of churches who are sufficiently like each other in faith and practice that they can work together. So we're not anathematizing people who are just separated from us by egalitarianism. I think that is a very big error. We cannot operate the Southern Baptist Convention on the basis of having egalitarians and complementarians serving together. That's been something that the SBC had to learn the hard way. And so no apologies there. I will also say that even as we talked about abortion and other issues, egalitarianism is not separate in hermeneutical and theological structure from some of these other issues. Now, that was really necessary for me backwards. I was once wrong on this issue as a seminary student. I was not corrected simply because I said, well, on this issue, biblically, I'm wrong. I did come to that conclusion. I also came to the conclusion, wait just a minute. That's not even consistent. I can't apply this hermeneutic, which I believe is required by Scripture. I can't apply it here and then have a carve out here. So all I'm saying is the SBC is complementarian. It's not a tribal fact. It's a theological fact. And so, I just hope and pray the SBC never compromises on this, because I can promise you that will be opening the door to massive compromises beyond. So let me ask you the question. In what recent church history, looking at denominations that have gone egalitarian, in how many of those have they stayed true on LGBTQ issues?
It's very true.
I will let you answer the question.
Yeah.
You know the answer.
Yeah, none of them.
Yeah.
We see that movement in the Methodist movement as well. We see that. Yeah.
So I was just in North Carolina, where I was in a city where just the past few days, I was in a wonderful gospel church. In fact, more than one. And, but all around was the death of old SBC churches that had gone liberal. Okay. So I was prompted to think and to say out loud, they said back in 1993, when frankly, I had a very bad encounter in the state of North Carolina over these issues. I was newly elected president here, clearly complementarian. They came at me with a meanness that I'll just say is quite memorable. And but I don't think most of the people in that room would have been soft on the LGBTQ issues, nor could they imagine themselves as being, but their churches are pretty much flying the rainbow flag now. It's just not an accident.
Yeah. So you would say it's a slippery slope in basically all cases. I
will not say it's a slippery slope, because that's a logical fallacy. I'll simply say it's a demonstrated pattern in which there are exceedingly few exceptions. And I think those exceptions are temporary.
Okay.
Or arbitrary.
Yeah.
And Ryan, I know you watched a documentary recently. You want to bring that up?
Yeah. No, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to skip that one.
Okay.
I do want to know, though, your general...
I will just simply say, I love documentaries on sharks.
On sharks?
Oh,
who doesn't?
I do love Shark Week.
Well, I don't know.
You watch Shark Week?
I'm almost always like traveling or doing something.
Okay.
That I go back and watch them when I can.
Okay.
I caught a 6 foot, a little bit larger than 6 foot hammerhead off of North Carolina.
Nice.
A few weeks ago.
That's pretty impressive.
That shark's going to be hanging on my wall.
Nice.
That's Dominion, brothers.
That's subduing right there.
For a boy who grew up in Florida, it's payback time.
Yeah. I'll tell you.
Excuse me. That documentary, I'm glad to talk about. Get
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah. I grew up in Brooklyn. Do you know anything about Brooklyn, New York?
I have been there several times.
Oh, really?
There are no sharks swimming in the streets.
None whatsoever.
There's other things swimming in the streets.
Right.
So when you come, make sure you stop by the studio. You're more than welcome.
Thank you.
But we went to. I grew up in Brooklyn, and my father would always take me fishing, and the only thing I ever caught was plastic bags and boots. Like literally not a thing. But I always wanted to go with him anyway because it was lots of fun. But I never caught a thing. Maybe it was my father's fault.
Well,
maybe we didn't have the correct bait.
We'll get something.
Oh,
all right.
That's
I promise you.
Official invite. I'm there.
Hey, I'm there. That I got to tell you, there is no fish on your line that it's not a good fish.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well,
As long as it's a fish.
Plastic bags and boots. You know, I can't hang that on my wall.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's true. Anyways, just final question here.
Yeah.
I just want to know your thoughts on the general direction of the SBC, the health of it, what the future looks like in your opinion.
Yeah, I just want to say, look, I am Southern Baptist to the core.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because I idolize the SBC. It's because I'm a Baptist. And as Baptist, I have a relatively low expectation of anything beyond the local church.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I know that may sound like heresy, but that's just true. I just have very little ultimate investment in anything beyond the local church. And you say, well, for 3 decades, you've been president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. It's beyond the local church. Yeah, but it only matters if it's serving the local church.
Okay.
So in other words, if we're not producing pastors and others workers for the local church, then the local church doesn't need us. They should shut it down. And the SBC exists because my local SBC church can't send missionaries all over the world. We are sending missionaries. We're helping with church plants all over the place, but we're helping with people who are doing it. It takes other churches with us, to help do this. And even the churches say we're doing this alone. Yeah, but you're kind of following trade routes developed by other missionaries in that sense. And so I just say to people, look, the SBC has taken hard stands for the sake of faithfulness to Christ and Scripture. The SBC, even though not every vote turned out the way I wanted it in this last election, we overwhelmingly just naturally, kicked out a church that was violating our polity and our doctrine. And, it was done without rancor, but, the SBC, liberal denominations don't do that, But you don't have to, and that's why I kind of corrected you in a kind way when you said you were going to be ordained a Southern Baptist pastor. The good news is there aren't any Southern Baptist pastors. They're just pastors of Southern Baptist churches.
Yeah.
So the SBC only matters insofar as it works for the cause of reaching the nations for Christ, mobilizing people so that churches working together, associating together. It's basic Baptist principle of it's just Baptist associationalism on the international scale.
Yeah.
In terms of the work. And, I will tell you this. I have several laws. I call them Mohler's laws of the Southern Baptist Convention. And one of them is that Southern Baptists will always do the right thing, given enough time. And, the SBC has taken time to think through some of these issues. But I just see time and time again, the SBC thinks through them and shows up and says, that's what's faithful to Scripture. That's what we're going to do. If the SBC gets in a pattern of doing the opposite, we're all out of here.
Yeah.
But I think it's the most wonderful thing. It's that local churches send people to meet other Baptists for a meeting, the Southern Baptist Convention. You seek to do the right thing, uphold biblical conviction, get excited about sending out missionaries and planting churches and educating God-called ministers of the gospel. And then you go back and serve the Lord until you come to another meeting again.
Yeah.
And keep those contributions coming because it's a channel of stewardship. And without that stewardship, none of this can happen. So unashamedly, I'll simply say I am a committed Southern Baptist. Being in the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention for nearly 40 years, 4 decades, it hasn't made me less appreciative of the SBC. It's made me more appreciative of the SBC.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. This was a complete honor. And a lot of the people that I know don't have an honor to sit in the room with you, nonetheless record with you, but I got corrected by you twice.
Yeah.
The honor is great.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure watching. It's been a pleasure watching.
You guys are fantastic in your spirit. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate so much your conviction. I want to ask you to put yourself in my seat for a moment. I'm 65 years old. I've been at this a long time. I've been praying the Lord would raise up a generation of men to lead in our churches with conviction. So how can I come to this conversation but just be flat out happy?
Yeah.
You aren't dressed the way I thought you'd be 30 years ago. But you know what? I can tease you about that because it's all to the glory of God.
Amen.
I want to be in a church like your church.
Amen. Well, in Ryan's defense, he does have buttons on his shirt.
That's right. There you go.
Right. I rose to the occasion.
That's right. And if you were in a British rock band, you could put a necktie on, and that would be.
There you go.
Yeah, I'd be rocking and rolling.
I had to represent Bibledingers. You can't see it from the camera.
There you go.
I had to represent.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, like Nick said, it was a pleasure watching you rebuke him a couple times.
Absolutely.
George,
And
hold
I'll
him accountable
Yeah.
to all his mistakes that he makes all the time.
Totally.
And also for you guys watching, we thank you guys so much. We hope that you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Mohler. It has truly been an honor to speak with a theological giant in our camp. So thanks again, Dr. Mohler.
God bless you guys.
Thank you.